My name is Chantel Meek, and I'm the founding executive director of the Children's Equity Project at Arizona State University. In just a few seconds, I'll be joined by my colleagues, Dr. Tanette Powell and Laura Bornfriend, to discuss in a report we recently published, Learning Joy and Equity, a New Framework for Elementary Education, in partnership with New America. For those of you who may not be familiar, the Children's Equity Project is a child policy center housed at Arizona State University that works in partnership with universities across the country to address and close opportunity gaps in all of the systems that serve young children and family. We do this through research, policy, and practice at national, state, and local levels. Now, when we started this project, we quickly came to the conclusion that there is no ideal elementary experience, but that there are a number of core ingredients that every child deserves access to that could be common across elementary experiences and elementary systems. And across these ingredients, which we'll go over in just a bit, you'll see a number of themes that come up again and again in the context of various ingredients. And these are really some of the themes that drove the development of the framework. The first is joyful learning and holistic development. Kids spend a lot of hours at school for many years. It's important, right, that they are learning and that they are doing so in a joyful way, in a way that is engaging, in a way that is fun for them. This is their childhood, right? And so we really think about that in the context of school policies and practices, really how learning happens in the context of positive relationships with teachers, with other students, enriching interactions, developmentally appropriate content, movement, exploration, and fun. We approach all of our work with equity at the foundation, including this project and this framework. We know that historically education systems were exclusionary and they were designed that way. And we know that today, many of these exclusionary pieces and many of these inequities continue to exist in schools across the country. Opportunity gaps and disparities in outcomes continue to be a reality in American schools. And we attend to these pieces and talk about them across the various ingredients. Ensuring that this framework is child-centered, really informed by, driven by, designed around how kids learn, how kids develop, what kids need to thrive holistically. So in that, we consider neuroscience, developmental science, learning science, and kind of really fold in all of those literatures to inform the framework. And finally, it's flexible to community context and priorities. Again, there's no one single model for the best elementary experience, right? Context matters, community partnerships are essential, and family voice, priorities, and leadership are crucial. Now, before we start and jump into the core ingredients, we think it's really important to understand the context, right, of the current education system, including the inequities that exist. Many of which are rooted and started in the past and continue to exist today. Others are contemporary and have taken different forms. But last year, the National Academies for Science, Engineering, and Medicine published a report called Closing the Opportunity Gap for Children Birth to 8, and it focused on one dimension of the report on the early grades. And in the report, you'll see a lot of data and an exhaustive review of the literature that really indicates inequities across all of these different dimensions that you see here. Funding inequities still exist across the country, with schools that are serving primarily Black and Latino students receiving fewer dollars per pupil than schools that are serving wealthier white children. Segregation still existing, and in fact, though it's racial segregation is no longer the law of the land, there is still segregation in practice. And in fact, we are more segregated in our American schools than we have been in decades. Facilities are still inequitable, right? Where we have facilities and the actual school buildings, right? And spending on construction and renovation and updating buildings being inequitable depending on which communities they're housed in. Enrichment opportunities like gifted and talented education not being accessible to all students. We know that research finds that even when Black and Latino students have the same grades and the same test score, they still have less access to gifted and talented education. We know that harsh and exclusionary discipline continues to be a problem in this country, disproportionately and unfairly targeting Black students and children with disabilities. We know that the default language of instruction is English, which disproportionately impacts and disadvantages kids who speak a variety of other languages at home. We know that inclusion of kids with disabilities is still a major challenge, with a lot of segregation of children with disabilities, particularly in the early years, where more than half of preschoolers with disabilities are getting their services in settings away from their peers in self-contained or other types of settings. We know that curriculum is still a major problem and has kind of bubbled up in recent years, right? And the teaching of accurate history, right? Really a challenge and under attack in lots of communities across the country. We also know that teacher and leader diversity, right, are issues that we need to attend to really build fair, equitable, quality systems for all of our students. So with that, we're gonna jump into the various ingredients. You'll see here, I'm not gonna read the whole list, but it ranges on everything from, school leadership to assessment to curriculum to pedagogies, to the physical environment and the architecture of the building. So with that, I'm gonna pass it to my colleague Laura, who's going to discuss some of the enablers at the policy level to implement this framework, and then to Dr. Tanette Powell, who will walk us through each of these ingredients.
Thank you, Chantel. And while we know that public education is delivered at the very local level, and many of the decisions being made right in the school building, there are important roles for school district leadership and for states to really establish conditions that enable schools and teachers to do their best work with children and families. And in the report, we've put together a number, it's not an all-inclusive list, but a number of policy enablers, of system enablers that should be in place to really enable what Chantel was talking about, the joyful learning, the equitable environments for children when they're in elementary schools. And so the first is really ensuring that resource allocation is equitably directed towards historically and contemporarily marginalized students. And so here we're talking about, dual language learners. We want to see high quality inclusive settings for students with disabilities. We need to focus on, school climate and mental health interventions, and ensuring equitable access to enrichment programs, to to all kinds of academic enrichment and social enrichment programs. We also, and aligned with that, we want to establish policies that are enabling and promoting resources to close opportunity gaps. We want to provide support and professional learning for school administrators, making sure that they have a deep understanding of the science of child development and really get how young children learn best, so they're not walking into kindergarten or first grade classrooms and thinking that there's disaster happening when children are playing, and that's where their learning is really happening. We want to ensure meaningfully engaging families in district level decisions, and when possible, even state. It means, authentically including families in those decisions, not simply, sending out a survey and asking them what they think, but including them in the development of policies and practices. And then the other one that we wanted to highlight is building that inter-office and agency cooperation and collaboration, because we know that there's a lot of silos at the state and even local level, and the better that early education offices that include, pre-K and even younger kids are connecting and coordinating with those offices that are serving children in kindergarten and the early grades, whether it's curriculum, assessment, standard development, all of those need to be thoughtful about what's needed for the elementary population, the early pre-K students, and how that differs from what's needed for those secondary students. Tanette, I'll turn it over to you.
Perfect. So I'm going to kick us off with the 14 core ingredients. And the first one is transformative leadership. Felt that this was really important. It's hard to do the other 13 if you do not have a transformative leadership team. And for us, that we really break that down in a few ways, but a couple that we share here is a transformative leadership team. They ought to be committed to disrupting racism in all aspects of the schooling experience. And so some of those examples are thinking about equitable access, ensuring that students are having affirming experiences and that there are positive outcomes for all children and families. The other one is just this piece around solidarity, right? It's important that you're working as a leadership team in solidarity with the families that you serve, with the educators who have been tasked with all of the different learning aspects of the school, and with the community, right? We want to make sure that schools are safe, that they're healthy, that they're affirming, and we believe that all of those things are rooted in racial equity and inclusion. The second one, now that you have that leadership team in place, is really around this vision and philosophy. And even in our report, we talk about these two things as probably just at the core of what you need to be able to build out the other core ingredients. And so we think about a vision and philosophy that, number one, as we said at the beginning, this should be about children. And so your vision and philosophy must be centered. It must be child-centered, right? And that vision and philosophy needs to inform the policies, the practices, and pretty much everything that shapes the schooling experience. And it needs to assert that, right, that children and families have a right to a high-quality education that prioritizes shared learning. It prioritizes the child's joy and family's joy, and that they're also protected from harm and trauma. The third core ingredient is really around this piece of explicit attention to the experiences and the outcomes of children from historically marginalized communities. Now, that was also one of our enablers that we had there because it's really important. If it's already happening at the district and the state level, it's going to be a lot easier for this to happen in schools. And so we break down some examples of what that is when we pay that explicit attention to the experience and outcomes of children from historically and contemporary marginalized communities. One is this idea of including a common understanding and intentional professional development of all employees on systemic racism and ableism. So this is incredibly important. We think it's important for schools to know how they're situated in the contextual history of that particular place. It also is important to think about data tracking. We need to be able to identify inequities so that we can improve, right? And using that data to inform policy and professional development. There also must be alignment between families' home languages and the languages of instruction offered in the school. Professional development ought to be aligned, right? And it should address bilingual development and holistic support for emerging bilingual students. And the final example that we offer for this core ingredient is just that we have to think about full high quality inclusion and appropriate accommodations of all children with disabilities across all learning settings and activities. So yes, this is in the classroom, but it also thinks about recess and play and all of the other aspects that make up a child's educational experience. Number 4 is universal design. And we believe that universal design should be built into every aspect of schooling. And that includes everything from how we think about family engagement to, yes, the classroom setting. We believe that universal design allows us to really see the individual child and not approach everything as a one size fits all. So this is not just for children with disabilities. Universal design is a beautiful concept because it allows us to center children with and without disabilities, that every child is given full aspect to every part of schooling, which is the physical environment, the lunches, the instruction, right? It's every single aspect. And so I'm going to kick off the next ones to my colleague, Chantel.
This one goes to Laura, I think.
Sorry,
Yeah.
Laura.
No worries. Thanks, Tanette. So I'll be talking just briefly about blended pedagogies, the next core ingredient. And really, what we mean by blended pedagogy is that there are multiple ways that learning and content is delivered to children, and that all of those ways are informed by the science of learning and development, which which says that joyful, play-based learning is really how young kids are going to are learning best. Allowing time for exploration, for choice, for their autonomy in making some decisions about how they learn, about what what center or activity they want to do to learn deeper and demonstrate their learning. It includes child-centered pedagogies, which can be discussed as inquiry-based learning, project-based learning, play-based learning. All of these are very similar but have slightly different takes, but really center the child and how they learn best and their interests. And then the third piece is culturally sustaining pedagogies, which brings in and values children's and families' culture into the classroom. It's really making sure that children are, they see each other and they see themselves in the content, in the ways that they're learning, and in what they're learning. The next core ingredient is research-informed, community-relevant, individualized instruction, and interdisciplinary curricula. We're talking about instruction that addresses all academic content areas. We know that particularly in early elementary school, that there is a heavy focus on literacy. And while literacy is extremely important, it's not all that is important for children to learn. And oftentimes putting more into things like math and science and social studies will further boost those literacy skills, as well as opportunities for oral language development through things like play and open-ended discussions with kids. We're also talking about balancing that direct and explicit instruction. So children should not just be in listening mode, they should be talking to each other and to the teachers, centering children and their identities, individualizing support for various learning styles and paces, and having those individual learning plans for students that are developed, with families and children's goals for themselves.
All right, I'm going to pick it back up at dual language education. We think that it's critical for kids to have access to dual language education in the languages that they speak at home and in their communities. We know that this is a fundamental issue of access to education, access to the curriculum for kids who speak languages other than or in addition to English at home, and really embedding this as an equity issue is critical. And so really thinking about how we really foster and nurture that bilingualism, that early biliteracy, and giving that opportunity, to all children, but ensuring that children who are English learners have equitable access to such opportunities, just because we don't have the demand right now. The supply right now to ensure that everybody has access. So as we build up to that level, really ensuring that we are prioritizing those children who have the most to gain and the most to lose for not having access to that. And really thinking about equitable enrollment beyond, in addition to English learners, of children who speak a language other than English at home, in addition to Black children, whether they speak a language, whether they're English monolingual speakers or speak a language other than English at home, children from low-income communities, children with disabilities who are often excluded, and often suffer from those the most from those myths that it is too confusing for them to learn more languages than just one. And so really ensuring that when we're looking at our enrollment across the board in dual language education, that we are prioritizing groups of students who have been historically marginalized, groups of students who have been historically excluded from these programs and opportunities, and really targeting those English learners to get in the door first. The next thing we look at is child grouping, and really thinking about how we best group children, right? In the United States, the vast majority of education systems are by grade level, right? Where there is one age of child, right? A single age in a single grade, and then you go on to the next grade and you have a different teacher and a different classroom, and then the next grade and the next grade. And we really try to interrogate whether that approach of this grade system and this age and grouping system is aligned with child development, is aligned with the best practice of research. There are other models that are less widely scaled that really think about things like grouping multi-age children. For example, Montessori models do that. We also see that done in rural communities, right, where there are fewer children and there's more multi-age grouping, and research does show a lot of benefits to that for both the younger kids and the older kids in the group. We think about looping, this idea of looping, right, where you keep children in cohorts with the same teacher for multiple years, so you're not starting from square one each new school year, right, where the teacher has to get to know a whole new group of children, a whole new group of families, and we know that that takes time. So really prioritizing those relationships and ensuring policies and practices that foster that continuity. I'm going to pass it back to Tanette.
Thank you. And so here we think about, I would say probably perhaps one of the most important groups in all of this work, right, is just our teacher workforce. And how do we ensure that that workforce is well prepared, that they're fully supported, and that is a diverse workforce. And so some of those elements, just to go a little bit deeper here, is that we believe that a teacher workforce should be diverse across all social identities, right, and reflective of the community that they serve. And so, yes, in terms of race and ethnicity, also in terms of geographic location, in terms of are they a part of that community when that's an option, thinking about, diversity across age, diversity across religion. There's so many different social identities across language spoken. And so we think that there's a lot of power in having that diversity in our teacher workforce. We also believe that it's important for the teacher workforce to understand the social histories of schools and the communities that they serve, right? Which is very aligned with the framing that we've had in the first place, is that it's important for you to know where you are, that particular place, the history of that place, and who your students are and who their families are. We also believe that the teacher workforce should be valued, right, for their expertise. You need time during the school day and during the work day to be able to collaborate, to co-design with each other, and to do that community work. All of that takes time, and we believe that that ought to be at the forefront of what teachers have. We also believe that it's important for their well-being to be considered and centered in all that they do. We need a healthy workforce. So when we talk about fully supported, that's also with that. And again, collaboration at the center of it, so that they're able to work with families and communities to think about, how does this family and this community define success, right? Is my definition aligned with success? Or my values and their values, where are the connections, where are the opportunities to support our youngest children? The next one, deeply connected, is that we have family engagement and community engagement that is culturally grounded and authentic. Right. And so if we think about this in the same way that we want to be able to support our youngest learners, we want to be able to support our teachers, we want this transformative leadership team, we must have culturally grounded, authentic family and community engagement. It must be rooted in healing and affirmation of communities that have been disenfranchised and, pushed to the margins when we think about education in this country. We must be able to think about how we repair that, right? How do we do that work together? That there must be alignment and how we even think about engagement in schools. And so, sometimes we may have our ideas as educators about how we want to engage families, but are we taking the opportunity to kind of stop and say, well, what are the ways of engagement that already happen in community, and how can we make sure that there's alignment? Also, that schools belong to the community. And because of that, right, that schools as community spaces must go beyond the school hours. And so this can be all kind of things of communities being able to host events there, playground access after school hours, just as a couple of examples. And again, that we're continuing to expand our definitions of access, of language, of connectedness in schools. and then that school policies welcome families during school hours. We know because of the state that we're in that safety is at the forefront of what we must think about. We want kids to be safe and all of the adults that interact to be safe. And so just finding that balance between ensuring that we have safe campuses, but that families also have access to be able to play at recess with their kids if they can, or have lunch with a child. And then this last one we have as an example of what this could look like is just making sure that parents have access to all the data that educators have access to as well, right? So again, that we know what our kids are learning, we know how they're learning, we know, who did they play with that day, if that's something that we're collecting. So again, that we just have this open, shared environment where families and communities are not just seen as folks to engage with, but that they actually are a part of the school community. Yep, we'll go to the next one. All right, and so 11, a school climate that embraces children's identities, combats racism and bias, prioritizes mental health and well-being. When we think about school climate, it impacts absolutely everybody that is a part of that school. And when we think about school climate, we really want to center joy, right? That there ought to be opportunities, as Dr. Meek mentioned, kids spend a lot of time at school. And so it needs to be a place that is fun, that is healthy, where we're paying attention to social development, that we're thinking about a child's emotional wellness, and not just the child's emotional wellness, but all of the adults who make up the school as well. And that we take time to think about identity development, that kids have agency when they're at a school, right? The ability to be able to say, yes, I want to do this, or no, not right now. And that we don't just have rules in place just for the sake of rules, right? And so how do we look at our policies, whether it's, seating, right, policies and arrangements, or whether it's how we do, lunch and some of those things, are we always in a space where we're like, what is the purpose of this rule and this practice? Is it child-centered? Is it fostering joy, or not? And if it's not, how do we have the opportunity to shift? Very similar to that, our 12th core ingredient is around resources and policies that promote health, well-being, nutrition, and movement. Again, we're talking about young people who thrive, on the ability to be able to have healthy food, different forms of movement. And so we think it's important for children to have access to free and structured play throughout the day that is in line with each child's need and development. We know that, they're very all at many different places. And so just making sure that, again, that when we think about free and structured play, that it is accessible to all of our kids, that we think about daily PE, right? And so sometimes when we think about, recess and PE, we have a tendency to not think of it as a necessity. But the data shows that it is very, very important. And if we are centering the work that we're doing in child development, then daily PE and multiple opportunities for recess is just going to automatically be a part of that. We also know that learning is engaged through movement. So just making sure that that is a core part of what learning looks like, and that food is nutritious, that it's fresh, not processed, that it's low in sugar, and also that food reflects the community, right? And so again, that children have opportunities to eat in alignment with, the various cultures, and to try new things as well, right? And so we also love this idea of meals being shared as a community, and where it provides opportunity for it to be a little bit unstructured, right? So not to sit there quiet, and maybe some flexibility around time limits so that kids have opportunities to rest, to socialize and be in community with their peers, and also for some movement. So for our 13th core ingredient, we have child, classroom, and school level data, right? And again, like, data is incredibly important, but not knowing how to use that data and how we use that to continue to foster high quality environments for children, we think are incredibly important. And here are some of the suggestions that we have. And so one of them is to think about data as a way to improve individualized instruction. Right? How do we allow the data that we have at the classroom level, the child level, and the school level to tailor professional development and inform planning and policy development? Also, how do we use that data to just be more bias conscious, right? To be culturally relevant and linguistically valid. And so again, it's thinking about what data we have and how we use that to really center the experiences of kids. How do we have multiple forms of data that we're thinking about and collecting so that it's not just, one test or one score, but we're thinking about all the different ways that kids learn, and we have assessments that are able to capture that, including things like oral ways to capture what students know and how they learn. And the last one is just around how do we accurately capture areas of strength that can be used to foster, a child's strength. And also, how do we use that data to really think about the attention and support that children need? So again, just being creative and open around how we think about data, where it's not just a single test, but if we're watching kids play, if we're listening to kids as they're in community with others, or observing them in community of others, how do we use that data to improve and support? And our final and 14th core ingredient is around the learning environment, right? We want learning environments that are safe, that are healthy, that are aesthetically pleasing, and most importantly, child-centered, right? And so again, that these facilities are universally accessible to all children, right? A great question that we should be asking is, who is this designed for? Right. And so when we ask that question, it allows us to think, are we thinking about children from, in many, many different aspects? And so are we thinking about all their different social identities, including whether they have a disability or not? And so we want spaces, physical spaces that promote well-being, that, promote learning and exploration and collaboration and creativity. And so that's where we think about how our seating is set up. Is it fostering that collaboration that we want to see? And yes, there are some very basic things that we must have, such as clean water, clean air, and then the ability, when possible, to think about indoor and outdoor classrooms. We also talk about the landscaping that encourages that connection with the natural world and allows for children to be connected to nature-based learning and outdoor learning for all students.
All right, and I'll close us out. Thank you to my colleagues. In the coming weeks, the CEP and New America will be digging deeper on each of the ingredients each month. So stay tuned for that. You can follow us on social media or sign up to our newsletters. Both organizations will be promoting these. And if you and your school and folks in your community are innovating for students in the elementary space, we would love to hear from you. Please reach out. If you scan that QR code, it'll take you to our website where you could check out the full report. Thanks so much for joining us. Bye-bye.